Okay, this video is to go over some of the week one material so that you understand organizations and the various definitions and relationships that are important to the social work profession. So in module one, you will find 5 readings. Um, One is on definitions and examples of nonprofit organizations, and we're going to go through that. Generalist practice within organizations. So the strengths-based general practice, a collaborative approach. I actually use this approach. I use a collaborative leadership approach in my career and as a leader, and it's incredibly relevant and helpful. So I encourage you to dig into that one a bit more. And then there's also some reading on effective leadership in social service organizations, combining management and clinical perspectives. One thing that I'll add to that is, in addition to being an expert in clinical service delivery, the business and management perspectives and side of working in a nonprofit is incredibly important. And I think you'll get a taste of that through this course as you write a grant proposal and look at a budget and assess the capacity of an organization holistically. There's another reading from Cornell University on nonprofit organizations, and then lastly, a reading from the Internal Revenue Service. And it's a lengthy document, but the section that you should particularly take note in is the one on issue advocacy versus political campaign interaction. So that reading in general is about election year activities and the prohibition of political campaign interventions. Incredibly relevant, given that we have an election coming up, and most of you in your professions will have ethical guidelines on advocacy versus political campaigning. So please do take a look at all of those websites and readings and spend some time on them. To start, just understanding the definition of what a nonprofit organization is. And there are 5 key elements or common characteristics that are important. So nonprofit organizations are organized for a public or mutual benefit, as opposed to being organized for the profit of an owner or investors. Nonprofit organizations come in a variety of forms. So an informal neighborhood association is a nonprofit organization, as is traditional charities, labor unions, hospitals, museums, large universities, local churches, soup kitchens are all examples of nonprofit organizations, and they vary widely in how they are structured, their administrative structure, the services that are provided, the roles of the staff and in that organization. And so as you do your organizational capacity assessment and move through this course, you will be reading some of your peers' papers and get some of that variety of organizations and how they are set up. There are 5 common characteristics among them all. So they are organized. That's number 1. They're private, so they are separate from a government entity. They are self-governing, so they often will have a board and leadership, of course. They do not distribute profits, and being voluntary. So the nonprofit distributing characteristic means that nonprofits can generate profit, but they cannot distribute it to owners or directors. The profit all has to be used to support the organization and the operations of the organization. Nonprofits can be grouped based on their field of interest. So there are 10 kind of classified groups of nonprofits. There's arts, culture, and humanities is one group. Education is another classified group. Environment and animals health organizations, human service organizations, international and foreign affairs, public or societal benefit, religion and faith-based groups, mutual membership benefit organizations, and then the 10th category is just unclassified or unknown, so kind of fits all the rest. There's some interesting historical roots to why and how nonprofits were created. Charity was seen as a religious duty, and people in need could rely on charity and on neighbors or the community to help them. And so churches used to collect money for those in need, and that was really the informal way that groups of people, groups of volunteers, or these groups were formulated to promote cultural or social or educational causes. And that is essentially the history of how nonprofit organizations were created. There's some more history and how nonprofits are tied to the philanthropic sector, in the Learning to Give reference that is in Module 1. The other important takeaway from this week is the types of organizational tasks and concerns that are associated with various staff members, so roles and responsibilities essentially. Administrative staff of a nonprofit organization are really thinking about resource adequacy, legal compliance of the organization, the quality of services provided, and how the organization is functioning. They may be involved in developing policies, applying for grants and funding, complying with legal requirements for the organization, and really setting that organizational tone through their leadership. Whereas supervisors, they help implement or translate those policies from administration to the front line. So some of you may be having supervisory functions in your organization. Communication is a key element of a supervisor's duty. Sharing information both up and down the chain of command, and implementing, again, that tone that the leadership sets. Providing guidance to workers, providing administrative support, and also ensuring that services are of high quality. Then there are direct care staff. So this varies by organization, but they're essentially carrying out the primary work of the organization. Direct service, providing direct services, maybe having a caseload of clients, and managing that workload from week to week. Some organizations have additional support staff. This also can vary by position. It can be supporting the front line or supporting other administrative tasks. And then clients are an incredibly important aspect of an organization. So understanding who that organization is serving, what are their needs? Does the organization have the capacity, the resources, the funding to be able to support those needs? Is there enough supply for the demand of services? So Chapter 9, the Generalist Practice with Organizations chapter, talks a little bit about assessment, guides you to be thinking about your own work experiences or experiences as a social work student. Are your needs and concerns as an entry-level employee the same as a supervisor or a director or someone who is supplying the organization with services? So each of those positions sees the organization a little bit differently, and it's important that in doing an assessment and utilizing a strengths-based perspective, you are being collaborative and inclusive in the dialogue to learn from all of those different service providers and users of the service, clients, supervisors. From every perspective, you are understanding what the needs are, what the challenges are, and what the roles are. So assessments, don't exist in a vacuum. They are a part of a broader system, which can be dysfunctional at times and in a myriad of different ways. There is a 10-step model of change that is included in the reading on generalist social work practice, where social workers would acknowledge that first there is a need for change, and that's very important for leadership to do as well. And then establishing agency ownership of the change agenda, that this is something that the agency can actually control, as opposed to maybe state legislation or something that is outside of the organization's control. Assessing the strengths and weaknesses of the organization is a critical component, critical step in really being informed by what changes might be needed. So then step 4 would be actually identifying the changes that are needed. And then the next step is trying to identify the best way to achieve those changes, how best to make that change. There's a lot of different models and tools and ways to go about identifying that. Formulating a pathway for change so that it is sustained, and sometimes change takes a very long time. So no matter what happens in the organization, whether there's turnover or change in leadership, you want to be able to sustain a pathway for that change to happen. Establishing organizational infrastructure. So sometimes that might be creating a task force or a group of people who are responsible for seeing forth that change to ensure that practices are being improved. And as change is happening, reflecting on that change, consolidating, creating procedures to maintain the changes and integrate them into the rest of the operational procedures is another critical step. Monitoring over time and reviewing changes to see if they are still helping the organization be more effective, or maybe they need to be tweaked. So iterating over time. And then lastly, evaluating organizational learning from the changes. What changed within the organization and among staff and across the clients that's worth continuing. And how can these changes be utilized for the future of the organization? So that's one model, acknowledging that the problem exists and then following a set of steps to identify the indicators that problems exist, and at what point do they become serious enough to warrant attention and interventions. So those, I think, are some key concepts for the first module, taking some internal organizational considerations, understanding, again, the intricacies of an organization, the various roles, internal structures, and how they're organized, the vision, mission, goals, and objectives of an organization. There's some examples here for you to read through. So really being clear about some of these internal processes and how they may impact the ability to affect change in an organization. And leadership is incredibly important. We will touch on this throughout the course, in this chapter and again in a few other chapters throughout the course. How an organization is led and the tone that gets set is incredibly important, and I'm sure many of you have experiences of that. So that is all I have for now. I look forward to seeing your discussion posts. There's 2 discussions for week 1. And please continue to think about your organizational capacity assessment, which organization you may want to choose, and email me if you have questions or concerns as we move forward.